What's up, YouTube? It's Oz again. This is going to be the second video in the van building basics series, and today we're going to talk about moisture and condensation. If you're just finding this channel, please hit that subscribe button and help me build this community here, and hit the like button, make a comment, help push the video out to others. I would appreciate it. So the first video was about insulation, okay? And I talked about my own kind of ideas on how I think is the best way to insulate a van, okay? And we're gonna have to talk about that a little more as we talk about condensation and moisture. So anybody who's done very much research on van life knows that condensation and moisture are an issue in a van, okay? And a byproduct of that is the potential for mold because of the moisture, all right? So now, just like in the other video, it seems like people in the van life community, like they only are looking at other van lifers for answers about how to do insulation, how to combat moisture, and all of these subjects, without like actually looking into the fundamentals of what's taking place and, you know, why this happens and how to mitigate it. So in order to talk about moisture and condensation and talk about how we try to mitigate its effects, we need to understand more about why we have these issues in a van, why they're so much more pronounced in a van, and how they occur, okay? So I want you to imagine this, okay? If you were to take a metal pan and place an ice cube in that pan, and then take a benzo torch, take a torch, okay, and heat that up, okay? What's gonna happen is that ice is gonna go from a solid and it's gonna melt into a liquid from the heat, okay? But if you continue putting heat on it, then that water is going to go from solid to liquid to gas. It's going to release the moisture into the air through evaporation, okay? Now this process also works in reverse. So if that were a sealed environment, then if you were to then make the pan really cold, the gaseous water, or the water vapor in the air, would condense onto the cold surface and turn back into a liquid, and then if you continued to cool it, it would freeze and turn back into a solid, okay? So this is how this process of condensation works. What is required in order for this to happen is a warm, moist air, a warm, humid environment, and a cold surface. So the warm, humid air touches that cold surface, and the moisture in the air turns back into a liquid and causes moisture, okay? So think of it in terms of this bottle of, just call this a glass of ice water, okay? You've got this really cold ice water inside of here, and because this is a warmer, humid environment, then when this warm, humid air makes contact with this cold surface, you get beads of water running down your glass of iced tea or whatever, okay? And that's a microcosm of what happens inside of that van. Now this moisture is mostly going to occur in the winter, because just say the liquid inside of the bottle is the outside air, which is very cold, and because you are in a metal box, that metal is going to get really cold, okay? And the outside air is the environment inside the van, okay? So because we are, number one, heating the van, even just our body heat causes heat inside of this small area, and because we're inside of there breathing and stuff, we're expelling, we're humidifying the air. So it's more pronounced because we are in a very humid environment. We're in a small van, and our breath is humidifying this environment, and we're heating the environment. So when that warm, moist air comes in contact with the cold surface of the van, it's going to cause condensation. Okay. So how do we mitigate this? There's really kind of three ways. Okay. And first, what I want to talk about is go back to the insulation that I talked about. So we created this radiant barrier with an air gap in the middle of the wall, all right? And we reduced the thermal bridging. So what this is going to allow for is it's going to allow the surfaces of that interior part of the wall to warm up, and because of the few thermal bridges, it's not going to necessarily make direct contact with the cold outer skin of the van once it starts to warm up. Okay. So what this insulation tactic does is it kind of is designed to control where the condensation occurs, because you have metal skin, insulation, radiant barrier, air gap with few thermal bridges, and then radiant barrier and wallboard. Okay. What's going to happen is you may get some condensation as the wallboards warm up on the inside, but once they get to a warmer temperature, the majority of that condensation is going to happen on the inside of the wall, in between those radiant barriers. Okay. Now, because we didn't close the sides off, that can breathe, and eventually it can evaporate. Okay. So it's not sitting in there festering and causing mold. It can run down the radiant barriers to the bottom, and usually vehicles will have weep holes along there where the moisture could drip out, and also air can get into that air gap and evaporate it, allow it to dry out. Okay. Now, think about what these van lifers do. They number one, they want to try to create a vapor barrier. A lot of times you'll see them using Reflectix as a vapor barrier, or they will try to create a vapor barrier of some sort. Now, the first problem with that is that you're trapping all the moisture inside the van. Okay. The moisture and the humidity in the air has no place to escape if you were able to actually create a good vapor barrier, which is highly unlikely in a moving vehicle. But this is what you don't want. You don't want that moisture to be completely trapped inside, causing it to condense on the interior surface of the wall, okay, and to make everything in the van moist. Now, I think that their goal is to keep the moisture out of the inside of the wall, okay? But like I said, in a moving vehicle, you are not going to create a perfect vapor barrier. And just a small little place will let a lot of moisture through. Do the research, and you'll be surprised at how much moisture actually can get into a wall just from a pinhole, okay? And with you driving down the road and this thing bouncing around, there's no way you're going to create a good vapor barrier. And then what they also do is they will put wool. They'll put like wool or rock wool or insulation or Densolid. They'll put these absorptive materials inside of the wall. And so as that condensation occurs inside the wall, this material soaks up that water. Then it sits there and festers and molds, okay? And because they've made this vapor barrier that is actually still allowing moisture to get in there, it can't breathe. And also because they've stuffed this gap with wool or whatever, air cannot freely flow in there and allow it to evaporate, okay? So my insulation allows for all this. It tries to force the condensation into the center, and then it doesn't put anything that soaks it up in there, and it allows it to breathe so it can evaporate. And this is a way to combat mold, okay? So I went on for a long time about that, but I wanted to get that across. So that's the first thing, is vapor barrier is bad, okay? In my opinion, the vapor barrier is bad. You want that van to be able to breathe a little bit. You don't want it a completely sealed environment. I mean, obviously a lot of people are going to have a max air fan or something like that, so maybe you get some moisture out that way. But the thing is, like, especially if you're using heaters like propane heaters, those things use a lot of oxygen, and you're trying to breathe in there as well. You don't want a really well sealed environment. Now, you want your door seals to be sealed pretty well and stuff like that. But, you know, like I talked about in the other video, convection is not really what we're worried about. We're not worried about a little bit of air getting in or escaping, you know, because there's so small of a volume of air in there. It's relatively easy to heat and cool that air, all right? So, now, we want to, number one, not have a vapor barrier. We don't want to trap the moisture inside. We don't want to trap the moisture in the walls. We want to allow some moisture to even escape potentially. Now, number two, we want to try to, I'm sorry, we want to try to foster an environment inside the van that is more dry, that is less humid. Now, it's always going to be somewhat humid because you're breathing in there, okay? But the best way to not foster a dry environment is to use propane for everything. And everybody uses propane for everything. Cook with propane. The Buddy heater, the Olympian heater, propane heater. You know, people use propane. When propane burns, it puts out moisture. It is humidifying the environment, causing that moisture to be worse. And you'll hear people talk about it, how they ran their Buddy heater all night once and woke up and everything in the whole fucking van was soaking wet. You know what I mean? Because propane puts more moisture into the environment. So you want to use a source of dry heat, okay? An electric space heater is dry heat, but they use so much electricity that I challenge you to run one of those for 6 hours, okay? The best option is, I mean, other than a little wood burning stove, which is not very feasible for most people, the best option is the diesel heater. The reason is because the diesel heater, the combustion technically occurs outside of the vehicle. It may be happening in the diesel heater, which is inside the vehicle, but the fresh air for the combustion comes from outside of the van through a hole in the floor, and the exhaust goes outside. It's a sealed combustion chamber, and the way it works is a fan, that combustion heats up a piece of metal, and then a fan takes air from the inside of the van and blows it across that metal to heat it, and it comes back out the other side. This is drying the air in the van, so you're actually removing moisture from the air, and that's what you want. That's why I'm such an advocate of these diesel heaters, okay? So away from the propane and toward the diesel heater. This is going to help you cut down on the amount of moisture inside the van. Now, the third way is, again, with the insulation, okay? We have taken steps to reduce thermal bridging and reduce the amount of heat that can travel through that wall, okay? Now, if you think back to the bottle, the reason that this condensation happens is because the warm, humid air touches the cold surface directly and condenses the humidity into water, okay? Now, with this insulation that I've put forward, we have reduced the thermal bridging, and we've created an air gap with radiant barriers to try to keep that heat from escaping through and touching the metal wall. Okay, so you are reducing the condensation on the inside of the vehicle and trying to isolate it into the space in the wall. Okay, so these are the three ways we're gonna not seal the moisture in. We're going to try to reduce the humidity in the air inside of the van, and we're going to try to keep that warm, humid air from directly touching the cold surface of the exterior skin of the van. And that's my opinions on the subject. Now, you could go further, like we talked about in the insulation, how we're going to put the wooden slats on the wall. Now, you could go to the hardware store and get the aluminum tape that they use to wrap ducts in air conditioning systems. It's not duct tape, it's the shiny aluminum tape, and you could wrap those wood slats with that, and that would even be better, because that wood will soak up some of that moisture, and if you cover it with that, it'll help keep it from becoming moist and potentially molding, but it will also help reduce radiant heat some more, so that may be a good strategy. Maybe even drilling some small weep holes along the edges to allow moisture that does form in there to drip out from the bottom and escape. There are other methods that can be used, but I just would say don't stuff the walls with wool and shit like that. Like, it's not a good idea. All it is like it's just going to get sopping wet and cause mold. Okay. Yeah, I mean, there's not a whole lot more to say about the moisture. Like, you just have to think about how it's happening and why it's happening, and do things to try to slow that down. Like I say, you're always going to have it to a certain extent, so why not try to control where it happens, and try to lessen it, and then try to control where it occurs so that you can deal with it, instead of just rolling the dice and hoping your insulation that you filled the wall with rock wool, and just kind of hoping that your vapor barrier is good enough and it's not going to get soaking wet and mold in there. Like, to me it seems like common sense, but it's kind of a difference between insulating a house and insulating a van. Like, it's completely different. Like, the theories of how insulation work are the same, but the materials, like being a metal skin, metal box, like, changes the whole dynamics of how you need to think about it. And I think that a lot of people go about it in the wrong way. So I hope that was helpful. Again, if this made you think about things in a different way, and was helpful to you, please hit that subscribe button, like the video, and leave me a comment and let me know what you think. Help me build this community and help me push this out to others. And thanks for watching.